You can find statutes in secondary sources, case law, or by examining the statutes themselves. In this screencast, I'm going to focus on using the statutes themselves to find a particular statute. You can start with online or print versions of statutes. I'll use online sources to find statutes in this video. With that introduction, let's look at our research problem. Jane decided to sell honey in Seattle and purchased 2 beehives and 2 colonies of 10,000 bees each. In April, Jane's bees swarmed out of the hives and stung several people. Jane is wondering what laws, if any, apply to beekeeping. Is there a statute that applies to beekeepers? Is there a statute that applies to selling honey? And could Jane be liable for injury caused by her bees? We're going to start with the Washington Code because local beekeeping and honey sales are within the purview of the state's legislative authority. Starting in Westlaw, let's go to State Materials, scroll down to Washington, and then choose Washington Statutes and Court Rules. This will bring you to the main Washington Statutes and Court Rules search page, which lists all the titles of the Washington Code. A more efficient way than looking at the various titles is to go to the Washington Statutes Index. Let's click on that. From here, we're going to search for bees and see if anything relevant to Jane becomes apparent. Bees. Indeed, there is something in the index about bees. The statutes that predominate in this list are probably most relevant to our search. Notice chapters 15.60 and 15.62. Further down the list, we also see honey. Chapter 68.28 could also be relevant. Look for these statutes to see them in their entirety by using the Washington Statute Find template. When you encounter a statute for the first time, it's a good idea to look at sections that include definitions, general provisions, or language such as purpose and findings. These sections will describe the scope of the statute. Let's look at some of these sections to see if they answer Jane's questions. Starting with 15.60, we see section 005 defines terms used in the chapter. Jane might be an apiarist because she's a person who owns bees or is a keeper of bees in Washington. Statute 15.62010 states the legislature's purpose in regulating beekeeping and sales of honey. Title 69, Chapter 69.28 delegates authority to regulate honey and honey sales to the Department of Agriculture. You would also need to consult regulations in addition to statutes to answer Jane's questions completely. Chapter 69.28 delegates authority to regulate honey and honey sales to the Department of Agriculture. You would also need to consult regulations in addition to statutes to answer Jane's questions completely. Now we'll look at searching the free, unannotated Revised Code of Washington online. Using this version of the code, we'll search for Jane's liability as a beekeeper. We know that this code prefers the word apiarist to beekeeper. And we find one result. Clicking on this takes us to Chapter 1560 again, Liability for Acts and Omissions. Jane is not liable if she's registered. Notice that this section was enacted this year. We'll need to look at the section's effective date to see how it applies to Jane. In fact, this section became effective after Jane's bees took their fateful trip to Green Lake. We've reviewed several points about statutory research. Start research with a topically arranged code. Look at all titles, chapters, and sections to find all statutes that relate to the research problem. Look for the effective date of a statutory section to be sure it was in effect as of the date of the research problem. And finally, consider both free and online sources for researching statutes.